Yeah, so everyone, I am so freaking pumped for you all today to learn from Aly. As you can see, he's dialing in from Australia, which, is no small thing. And for those of you who don't know anything about Aly, he's a co-founder and CIO of Designbox. Aly is an innovation entrepreneur focused on positive impact. Our kind of people. His training is as a product designer and mechanical engineer, coupled with 27 years of casual inventing global manufacturing experience. This has enabled you and your team at Designbox to launch impactful projects for major brands while partnering with distinguished talent and garnering dozens of patents and design distinctions. As an entrepreneur, Aly has co-founded and exited several efforts. Entities include SparkCon, which is this amazing festival. It's one of the largest open source creative festivals in the world. Gamila, a line, did I say that right? Gamila?
Gamila, if you're
Gamila, a line of sustainable gourmet beverage makers that was sold to 7gen and Unilever. And Oceanworks, a marketplace that repurposes ocean plastic for the circular economy. So Mario, I know you'll want to get to know more about Aly. Currently, you're in Australia, serving as the project director of a major federal grant awarded to the Plastic Collective. Definitely gonna have to talk about this. This involves a comprehensive community approach to launching micro-enterprise recycling units that help remote and vulnerable communities across Asia reverse the tide of ocean plastic. That's like a big resume, Aly.
Did everyone fall asleep?
No, I think everybody's probably like, we want to learn all the things. But it's so funny because it's like, where do you start? I've heard a lot of your story, thankfully, to the Innovate Raleigh conference. And I really think a good place to start is like your story at NC State. Like, how did you become an entrepreneur? And what was it that kind of sparked that interest?
Yeah, well, listen, always good to connect back home. So we're pretty excited. We're headed back July 8th. I'm getting my jab right after this call.
Yeah.
So they only have AstraZeneca here, so it won't be quite 12 weeks before we travel. So there's a lot of question marks, but we've been dying to get home. And yeah, it's interesting because I came here originally because my brother lives in Australia. And he is the CEO of iAccelerate, which is a business incubator, I guess the largest, or one of the larger incubators in Australia. And they're part of the University of Wollongong, which is a partner with NC State. And right before I left, I was the social entrepreneur in residence at NC State, helping with their social innovation fellowship program. And UOW here heard about it, and then they finagled me for a talk that was pretty cool on impact, entrepreneurship. And next thing I know, I was here. And then right when I was ready to go home, COVID happened, lockdown happened, and reading the tea leaves, you could see Australia's probably going to get a little bit more under control than Mr. Trump was going to. And so we ended up staying a lot longer than anticipated. So we've been missing home quite a bit. Looking forward to getting back soon. But yeah, it all started with NC State. I'm trained as a mechanical engineer and industrial designer. And it's one of those things, like I can't tell when engineering stops and when design begins, or design stops and engineering begins, or how all that stuff works. That's just kind of a natural thing for me. And in many cases, been working for, especially early on, working for some, big corporations that were wanting to solve some pretty vexing problems. And once you put design engineering together, it kind of put you in this weird space. So I wasn't really part of a design department. I wasn't really part of an engineering department. And later on, that's become known as like the innovation space. But a lot of times you come up with something innovative, and then, the patent attorneys love it because it's never been made before. And the procurement guys hate it because it's never been made before. And then same thing kind of happens on the sales and marketing side. Marketing guys love it because it's never been made before. Sales guys hate it because it's never been sold before. And so that frequently kind of pushed me into a lot of really different and interesting conversations and relationships. And the thing that was kind of touching all of it the same way I was is entrepreneurship.
Mm,
That you had to be, if you do something innovative, then you got to really think through the customer and all the customer, voice of customer stuff, but you also have to be thinking about the voice of supply chain and the voice of development of all that stuff while you're thinking about voice of innovation, because you really got to do something interesting and different. And so when you put those three voices together, I think that's what makes an entrepreneur, more likely to be successful.
that's powerful. Um,
Yeah.
and so from all that, so it makes sense. You found yourself kind of in that space of entrepreneurship, and how did that, like, what was the impetus? Is that why you started Designbox? Like, is that kind of, did you decide, what, I fit in this entrepreneurship space, let's build my own
Um,
company?
well, yeah, Designbox is kind of, is an interesting thing. Listen, I think what probably starts it all is it just being creative. So, if there's a curse and a blessing about being creative, and the blessing is the ability to come up with new ideas and things like that, and to be comfortable with uncomfortable situations. The curse of it is you're never happy, you're
Mm,
never satisfied, right? Like, you sit down at dinner and you look at the flatware and you're like, why the hell would you make a fork like that, and like that, or whatever, right? Your whole life, all you see is like things that could be improved upon. And that's the way a creative person will experience life. And it's, you know, and if you don't experience it that way, then it's almost impossible to be creative, because if you just accept everything as beautiful and wonderful as is, then you won't have that impetus to go for new ideas and new concepts. And so I think the key to being a balanced individual is being able to turn it on and off. But you shouldn't turn it off too much and you shouldn't turn it on too much. There is that good balance. And what I've found is, like, there are a lot of designers who go into these situations where they have to turn it off more and more because they're kind of surrounded by a lot of things that aren't just really going to work for them. I mean, designers in classical GM, you know, guys that get to design hubcaps for like 17 years, like literally, like, okay, at some point, some part of you has died, you know, and I worked same thing with Bausch and Lomb and sunglasses. Like I would design sunglasses with these legendary designers, but then I would go design shoes and gloves, but I would see some of these guys had been designing sunglasses for like, 30 years, had designed some of the classics, but somehow had like, you could see them kind of shut down in a
mm,
way. And so I think if you are, in that creative space, then you're also going to see like not just creativity in terms of the physical environment or things or apps, but you're going to start to see things like, wow, why is this city organized this way?
mm,
Or, why are these politics coming out this way? And, whatever it is, or how come we don't have a soapbox derby? And, things like that are going to start to happen. And next thing you know, Kirby Derby Day, is invented, or um, and SparkCon was kind of a funny story because that was, I think it was Money Magazine published some articles saying that Raleigh was the most creative city in the United States. And a bunch of us got together and we just got so depressed. It's like, it's like, if this is as good as it gets, this is so depressing. And so I'll always credit Paul Frederick for being the one to say, well, everyone keeps saying that we're creative, Raleigh doesn't have a river, but we have that. Why don't we claim that and like go with it? And that's really what led to me kind of pushing for SparkCon. Like, what would it mean if creativity was the river of Raleigh?
mm,
What does that riverfront look like? How do you keep it healthy? How do what does commerce look? All those kinds of things. And you really got me thinking, and that's how SparkCon happened. And same way, like in terms of you asked about like Gamila as an example. It's like all the coffee pods and and all the things that as a creative person you also wonder about sustainability and what are we doing, and why these cake cups, like
mm,
all this plastic, and all that junk. It's like, can't we make single serving coffee that is 100% compostable and bioavailable? Why do we have to have these tea bags that are all polyester satchels of the worst quality tea you can get from the cheapest possible sources and all that kind of stuff? And so ended up making this gourmet beverage line based on that. And yeah, then ended up kind of resonating with seventh generation people. So sometimes like the design might come from a client,
Mm.
like saying, we really want you to do this. Sometimes you just get informed and saying somebody ought to do this. And once in a while, someone turns it back around and says, no, you ought to do it. Um, and once in a while, you give in.
I love that because that's kind of a question I have. Because I mean, you're I mean, y'all, he's legendary for doing so many amazing things for our community. And I mean, and your story is problem solution, right? Like problem. I mean, you started First Fridays because artists need to start showcasing their work. So you're like, well, let's create an event to make sure that they're showcasing their work. And that's like one of the coolest things that happens in Raleigh, like even now, and but knowing that, like knowing that you have so many ideas, how did you balance building a business? So I mean, it sounds like you've gotten, I mean, because of your unique skill set, you've been able to work with big corporate clients. But how did you balance like your time and strategy around like building like a sustainable business model versus just doing really cool, impactful work?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, I'd like to, like for instance, something like First Friday. Listen, First Friday existed before I came around for sure. So
Hmm,
I would never claim to invent that, but it had been limping around as like four galleries for a long time, you know.
got it.
But I think the key to growing something or trying to like, get some traction is to recognize those that have come before you that have kind of paved the way and partnering with them and
Mm,
helping to amplify what they're doing. And SparkCon had a whole lot of that as well. That was actually like in the whole ethos of one of the five pillars of SparkCon is that you had to tap existing networks. Like you couldn't pretend to create a fashion scene. You had to go join all the fashion groups and talk to them, kind of thing. And I think that's been one of the elements for me that I just have always thought was important. First of all, you save cash, if you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's better if you go buy a wheel. But also, you're kind of honoring people that have learned a lot before you. And by working with them and being respectful to them and what they've done and all that stuff, a lot of times people will open up to you and really want to work with you and support you, or maybe even invest in what you're doing. So I think that's been an important element for me, has been able to figure out, um, I guess, the soft skill side of innovation, and it's like it's always to me overlooked. For instance, like, there's a lot of work I've done in factories. So by designing a lot of innovative things, then you end up sometimes building a factory. So I've had to do that where I've designed a product and then had to design the factory to make the product. Pretty intense. It's an amazing experience to have that kind of vertical thing. That's where I get to put my engineer hat back on and stuff. But actually, a lot of it is just people skills
Mhm.
and just being nice to people and being respectful. And I work with a lot of multinationals who think like, okay, procurement or just get some vendor to go make that stuff. And or I'll hear someone talk trash about made in China or stuff like that. A lot of times it's like, man, you're just so disconnected. Like I have some wonderful, wonderful friends in China that I would consider like family, that are some of the most beautiful stand-up people you can imagine.
Mm.
And I know some super villains in America. I know some super villains in China, and I know some wonderful people in America. So like, it doesn't make sense to pretend like you're going to do something important and then like rely on stereotypes. And one of the people I think has been really influential to me is Zaria Dorian, who is like this guy I've partnered with for many years, who when he was in factories, if they didn't know what they were doing, he would invest his time and effort, usually me, and saying, Ollie, get these guys up to speed. Let's get them into like the new era of manufacturing. and would pay for me to hang out with the factory, sometimes for a month at a time, to like get everything. So it's working really nicely, and everyone has good jobs, and things are being made with good quality. I mean, good factories make good quality stuff, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so if you invest in those people, man, it comes back tenfold. And
Mm.
so that's something that I've learned from others, is that like if you want to be profitable, if you want to like really do well, it's about investing in your own network, investing. And if you have knowledge to share and you put that, you give that knowledge or offer that knowledge to someone, even though it's not part of the project, so many times those people come back and say, you know what, what are you thinking? We want to take a chance with you. Will you design something for us? Or will you do
Hmm.
something like that? And I feel like the more I've honored the relationships, or like invested in them, I should say, um, I feel like the more successful I've been.
Oh, that advice is gold. I mean, really, and so powerful. And it's just so interesting to hear how that's played out throughout your career too. That giving and in turn it comes back tenfold. What has surprised you most about entrepreneurship? Or did anything surprise you? Or did you just kind of go in with an open mind?
Well, I think when you first come into like entrepreneurship, especially these days, it's like I don't know, some like slide deck of, the 12 pitch slides or something like that. And like there's one way to do it, and all that. And it's like nothing could be further from the truth. There is, I mean, the whole idea of entrepreneurship is that you could do it any different direction you want.
Mm.
And I think that's been interesting. I would say the same thing for me as in my career. When you come out of college, you're like, I came out of college thinking, oh, I want to be the best designer I can be, right? Or I want to be the best engineer. And I would, you know, I'd have schizophrenia on it, but I would still like want to be able to like, okay, what is it like to be a great engineer? Or what is it like to be a great designer? Like, do I have to wear like an orange suit? Or you think about like, well, all these like,
Yeah. Like, what does that even mean?
yeah. And so and I found myself unconsciously shoving myself into boxes, like, okay, I want to fit in that designer box, and now I want to fit in that engineer box. But like the most interesting relationships I've had in my career are the ones where they hire me because I'm not in one of those boxes.
Mm.
The most interesting interviews, most successful interviews I've had is when people say, you know what, just tell me about where you're going. What about you? Well, the job can shift. We just want to get the best we can out of you. And it just took so many years to have the confidence in myself to be myself, and to stop thinking about the schoolboy idea of what an engineer is with his pocket protector, or I don't know, whatever it is. Like, I don't know why, like you think you're supposed to be something else. And I feel like in school, and maybe it's part of that, like, what are you going to be when you grow up? And you just think about, if I'm a fireman, I have to wear all that stuff, or I don't know. We push ourselves into these roles, probably unconsciously or possibly because parents are putting pressure on you to make a decision already. Um, and at the end of the day, it's not what that's about. I think it's about your insights, it's about your uniqueness, and those boxes should have to fit inside of you. And I think that's the way I look at it, things now.
Oh, I love that. There's only one you. And what are you? And, what are you uniquely amazing at? It's pretty powerful. So, group, do you all have any questions? If not, I have more. But I just wanted to give everybody a chance to ask if there's any burning questions.
Nathan wants to talk about K cups.
Ooh, that is. I'm big on the greenwashing front, and like lately they've been on a big kick about like, ooh, it took us 5 years, but we made them recyclable, and I throw up a little bit in my mouth, and my head explodes, and then I just have to. And I sit there like drafting replies on LinkedIn, like, ooh, I'm gonna tell them, and I'm like, I'm just gonna go do something else.
Well, I actually consulted with them, with Keurig, to
Ooh.
try to figure out how to do it. It is like the screens of a recycling conveyor belt are a certain size, and anything smaller than that size falls through.
Oh.
It never gets recycled. So, all these recyclable, if you want to get into greenwashing, if it can fit through a hole, which they're usually, I think, 2.5 inches on a standard conveyor belt in like most of the East Coast. And like if it falls through that, it's landfill. So by definition, it can't be. It can't be recycled if it's under a certain form factor. So yeah, there's just a lot of greenwashing going on. Sorry, that was just Nathan and I, guys. Sorry, we were just having a moment there.
Yes.
I mean, it's a valid side point. Okay, well, I have a follow-up, and then you all. Oh, Irma. Okay, good question. How did you build your first team?
Yeah, good question too. I think originally it was just me, so it was just like me in a room. Kind of back to that now, but or at least I am. It's like working from home and all that. So I've actually been having some deja vu of like working from home, but I think originally it's just me having like a few key contracts, and I would say that's one thing over time that's been pretty steady is like having one of these clients or contacts, whatever, that's maybe 50 or 60% of my time, and then the rest is, to me, what I always think of as investing in the future. That future client who will become one of those 50 or 60% clients. Maybe 40, maybe I'll say 40 to 60, depends on the year, like how that's gone. But there's always like that biggie. And I think cultivating the biggie is something that's always been important. So in the early days, it was like, okay, I had Bausch and Lomb. I think I had 3 clients my first day when I struck on my own.
Yeah.
It took me 6 months to get all that lined up. So I was kind of working 2 jobs for about 6 months until I get everyone lined up. Once I got the contracts, I got my first house payment in, bought a house the month before going on my own. And yeah, stupid, but just one of those things. It's meant to be. And yeah, to make sure the first payment went through, I had 3 clients, and I could do all the work myself, but realized pretty quickly I could use some help on a lot of communication stuff. So I hired just one person as a designer to kind of help me through some of the busy work. And then talking to my father, who was an independent consultant, he told me that, the most important thing I could do is find someone who has left the workforce and wants to come back and is really good with bookkeeping, And so sure enough, I found someone who had kids and was kind of done with that, wanted to get back in part-time, 20, 30 hours, Jane Templeton. And she became the rock. Like, she became the person that like took away all my anxiety about the bills and the this and the that, which like can derail me in a creative moment. And then after that, started building up like skill sets where I saw, based on the clients that I had, if I had, more cut and sew type work, then I needed cut and sew designers. If I needed, my wife joined me on graphic design, if we had more graphic design stuff going on. And after that, it's kind of an ebb and flow. But a lot of it is just reflecting the clients we had and the clients we're investing in, and ultimately where we want our business to go. And right now, we're a little bit more and able to follow our own direction, I guess.
That's awesome. Eric, I saw you raise your hand, and then we've got a question from Mario.
Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys,
hey, what's up, all the balloons, Eric?
Oh yeah, this is something. I don't know. When I got home, it was just up there, so I don't know.
Awesome. It looks like a party.
Yeah. So guys, I am back from my hiatus. I graduated like 2 weeks ago. So, but
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I'm finna start writing a book about design thinking, and just like 10 questions, like based off 10 questions, 10 big questions. I think it's called A Curious Quest, looking at 10 questions and then rethinking about them. But I want to do it from like a youth perspective, and how you have a lot of questions, and then how typical questions are not necessarily the right questions to ask. And when you evolve those questions to something a little bit more thought-provoking, then you can actually make a difference based off of it. But I was trying to see I have another project, like it coincides with each other, that I want to make a course where it's called add-on, where usually when you come home from work, you work on your side project, but then when you come home from school, you get even more education and start building on those skills, because school is taught to teach you how to be a worker and how to build those skills up on how to be a leader. So I was trying to see, and that's just, I said all that to just ask this simple question. But what is the best way to go about that, to get people to take you serious from a young age? Because I kind of think people would be like, this 20-year-old kid, who you think he is. That's what I'm trying to see.
It's interesting. I did double major in mechanical engineering and product design. I was able to take my design degree and go more general, just in terms of creative process, creative thinking. The actual creative process became most of the focus of my degree. So I went really broad with that, and then at the same time, in engineering, got kind of more and more narrow on specifically like design for product design engineering. And it was interesting because all my work at design school was all project based. Like you got to make an X, right? And while you're doing it, you're gaining these skills, and then you're delivering this final project. And then in engineering, it was all about like you're developing skills, right? Like differential equations, fluid dynamics, or whatever. But ultimately, at the end, like in senior year in engineering, then you have this like thesis project where you kind of integrate skills. And to this day, probably the only thing I really remember from engineering school is that project. And I pretty much remember every single project I did in design school. Huh. Like now the skills, they came and went. But like, for instance, if I want to talk to you about color theory and the primaries of pigment or the primaries of light or, things like that, I could describe it from a physics perspective or from an engineering perspective. But the way it lives in my mind is that project I did when I was painting, right? And so I think if you really want to get into understanding like additional skills and all that stuff, to me, it's about the integration of those skills in a project that really cements it for somebody. I think like individual skill development doesn't work very well. And I'm seeing the same thing with my son playing soccer, back in the US, it's a lot of game time. In Australia, it's much more like skills. And you can see like the retention on just pure skill building disappears once they're in a real game. Huh. And whereas, the Argentinian coach we had back in the US, it was all about gameplay and the skills came along with it. And so I would say the same thing for, people who really want to get in design thinking or like kind of really improve their stuff, just do projects. And so what I did in high school as an example is I made recumbent bicycles. And I was able to, and so like these are bicycles that you sit back in because you get triple the power when you use your back muscles and all that stuff. So I had there's some biology in there, how all that works. But then I was able to get credit with my physics class because I was looking at ratios and, what does that power stroke look like and all that. Then I got credit with my drafting class because I was doing all the technical drawings of that. And then I got credit with my shop class because I actually built it and wrote it. And so I didn't realize I was in high school. I was creating my own independent study. I was just saying, I just want to do this. I want to build a recumbent bike, but it's going to use stuff that all you guys want me to learn. So is that cool? And man, it was like there was so much energy, momentum behind that. And I got out of 3 classes. So, I would just think think of a project. And I think the other thing that a project does is that it cements your point of view in life. I really, even from that age, I wasn't really into cars. I thought cars were really bringing a lot more problems than hope. And I was like, well, maybe it's just because bikes aren't efficient enough and whatever. So it kind of put me to the test, about my convictions is to try to actually build something to solve it. And then you realize how hard it is. And that's really good for the soul.
Wow. That's freaking amazing. One of our last questions. What was the biggest hurdle that you've experienced in creating something that didn't exist yet? And I'm going to follow it up with, then how did you handle that?
So many challenges, so many troubles.
No pressure in taking one.
Well, I think sometimes, like, I try to get my kids to do that. My kids are now 12 and 8, and we're going around Australia and seeing some incredible stuff, and people want to whip out the phone. I'm like, all right, but like, okay, let's all take a mental picture. Like, everyone just slow down for 5 seconds, put your finger here, and just pretend like you got a camera here, and whenever you touch that, you'll remember this moment. Like, let's just take a mental photo, and those mental photos do stick out in my own career. And I would say there's this one, it was for the coffee press I was talking about, where, man, it just wasn't working. Like, my seal, the gasket seal to press one thing into the other, like, I couldn't get it to work. I kept blowing my seal, and I couldn't understand why. And I'll just remember sitting there at, like, it was like this little water fountain with these like $10,000 koi swimming around in this like not very nice factory, but the owner really liked his fish. And so I'm sitting there looking at these fish, and I'm like looking at like my seal that's failing. There's 100 people in the factory just waiting for an answer, and I'm all by myself in this parking lot looking at these fish just like this. Oh my God, like, I have no idea. And when I stopped freaking out, then just started saying, well, let me go back through the whole history. Why are we in this problem? And just started backtracking. How did I get here? And I was like, well, we did this seal on this thickness because of this. And we did that because of this stainless steel. When we did that because of this seam on the stainless steel. And then just started like kind of tracing my way back, and realized I pushed myself into this rabbit hole based on a whole bunch of logical decisions. I ended up in an illogical place, and I had to kind of deconstruct it. And I think that's probably the best tool I can offer. It's like, sometimes you end up somewhere and it just seems unworkable, and why doesn't it work? And a lot of times it's because you put yourself in an unworkable situation. And if you can kind of deconstruct and backtrack a little bit, that strategy seems to get me out of a pickle.
That is also gold. So last question, is there any advice you haven't yet shared that you would share with a mission-driven entrepreneur that's starting out or at a transition and kind of trying to get to the next level?
I think it's great to be a mission-driven entrepreneur. I would say the number one thing that I come across is not having a proper framework. So, like, I'll talk to people and they say, well, I want to reduce my carbon footprint. It's like, okay, so let's reduce your carbon footprint by doing everything with slave labor. Are you happy now? Is that really what you're trying to do? Is reduce carbon footprint? Like, when you narrowly define what success is, you build the kinds of problems that we end up with. You can't do that. You need a more comprehensive framework. That framework can be a religion. It can be a variety of things, but you need a comprehensive framework to make intelligent decisions about what sustainability and positive impact is. And you can't just use a single tool like a life cycle assessment or water quality study or whatever it is, and think that's a framework, that's a tool. And and you need a lot of tools in your toolbox, but you need a framework to understand what the heck you're trying to build. And likewise, you have to understand the difference between good and bad. And as in, people say, I want to have the carbon footprint, and and William McDonough, author of Cradle to Cradle, would say, okay, so instead of driving towards a wall at 60 miles an hour, let's drive towards it at 30 miles an hour. Have we done good? Or should we get out of the car and walk around the wall? So doing less bad is very, very different than doing good. And you have to understand that. And without a proper framework, you'll be confused about that. You'll also be confused about, like, hey, I reduced carbon, but I didn't think about water, or I didn't think about toxicity to your skin, or I didn't think about circularity in the economy. So, I mean, my go-to is Cradle to Cradle, which has 5 pillars that always kind of set me straight. I feel like it balances out the way I look at the world of saying, okay, did you think of this? Do you think of that? In each case, you know, like, what is the social impact as well? But there's other ones too. Like I think the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or there's other frameworks out there, and it can be your religion, or it can be your philosophy, or it can be whatever it is. But don't relegate your stance in the world to a single metric. We are more sophisticated than that. We are smarter than that. And most of the problems that we're in are because of those single-minded tools. So as an example, there's you know, sometimes I use a lecture with some students about, you know, unintended consequences. The plastic water bottle was the perfect solution to getting clean water to a remote area. It's perfect. And without any other context about what is good or bad in the world, it is the perfect solution. And there's some engineer that probably went to school with me who came up with that and did it perfectly. And the solution is perfectly wrong. You know? Mm-hmm. So how do you design in a context? How do you design thinking broader or bigger than that? And for that, I think the impact leader tomorrow has to be a part ways philosopher, and has to understand a broader context in the world, and has to see that vision when everyone else can't.
Wow. Well, Aly, thank you so much again. That was very powerful. Kaylee. Yes, as someone, it would, and thank you for sharing some of your frameworks too, because it's so important to look at them and what are they and why are they what they are. And I mean, a handful of us are obsessed with the B Corp movement, but even then, even within that framework, we are constantly questioning things and constantly asking, is this enough? Is this right? What is stakeholder value? What is maximizing that? What is for profit versus what shouldn't be, right? Like,
yeah, I think B Corp is not a comprehensive view. So, and I like what they're doing, but I think it's only part of the story. So I would say, you know, you need something broader like Cradle to Cradle or SDGs, or whatever. There's also religious frameworks and other things that would be bigger. But I think you need to be bigger than just like a certain, you know, view, especially when it's tied to a business plan. So just, you know, be really, you know, kick the tires on those kinds of things. And B Corp needs it, because B Corp's not good enough. And it's good, but it's not good enough. And we're smarter and bigger than that.
I love it. Well, thank you so much again for making the time to be here. We really, really appreciate it. It's lovely to see you again. And yeah, and I can't wait for you to be back in Raleigh.